We have another Qbounti question, and this one is probably one of the most serious Qbounties, but necessary Qbounties that we've gotten so far. Thanks for tuning in. So we had a Qbounti question asking me to address the Doomsday Clock, as Tulsi warned on the 24th that the Doomsday Clock is itching ever closer to midnight. Scary enough, it's only about 100 seconds till midnight now. Over the last, 3 years? Or we can go back to 2010. So in 2010, it was at 6 minutes to midnight. 2012, it was at 5 minutes to midnight. 2015, it was at 3 minutes to midnight. 2017, it was 2.5 minutes to midnight. As you can imagine, that it jumped pretty significantly from 2015 to 2017 because of the Russiagate scenario. 2018, it was 2 minutes to midnight, but now we're at 100 seconds to midnight in 2020. Now, for those of you who are curious, I know a lot of people may have heard of the Doomsday Clock but aren't familiar where it originated from. So it's on the website of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it's the creator of the Doomsday Clock was co-editor Hyman Goldsmith, and they asked the artist Martel Langsdorff to come up with the design for the cover of the 1947 edition of the Bulletin, which is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. Martel, as she was known professionally, was married to a physicist, Alexander Langsdorff, who worked on the Manhattan Project while at the University of Chicago. At first, the artist considered using the symbol for uranium, but as she listened to scientists who had worked on the bomb, as they passionately debated the consequences of the new technology and their responsibility to inform the public, she felt their sense of urgency. So she sketched the clock instead to suggest that we didn't have much time left to get atomic weapons under control. Now, it should be mentioned that the Doomsday Clock now does not only represent the threat of nuclear catastrophe, however, it also represents existential dangers to humanity. So now the Doomsday Clock, whereas before it was mostly about the atomic weapons and a potential nuclear holocaust because of our constant beef with Russia during the Cold War, but also it includes climate change, and it's moving as fast as it is, not just because of the potential threat of nuclear weapons, but the climate change debate seems to be, unfortunately, devolving, right? It's not being addressed substantively, and we can have an argument about that, a debate about that, not an argument about it, but we need to have it more often, right? Once the Green New Deal kind of, the brand fell out of popularity, which unfortunately seems like it's falling out of popularity as AOC begins to simmer, her brand is seemingly simmered down for a plethora of reasons, which we can get into later, but people aren't taking climate change as seriously as possible. Some corporations are trying to use climate change for a money grab without actually addressing the roots. They're not coming up with solutions as much as using climate change as an excuse for people to incrementally move in the direction that the corporations want them to. Like, for example, carbon tax. Carbon tax is not a good idea. Especially when I just found out the other day that there's technology right now that can take carbon out of the air and use it in soil. Yes, that technology exists. We're just, of course, not using it. So Tulsi was the one who brought this up, and I'm glad she did. She actually, in the video, that's why this person asked me this question. In the video that she did on January 24th, she said that she would be willing, no, not would be willing. She said actually her first day she'd make a call to China, make a call to Russia, and immediately sit down for a summit to end the nuclear arms race and work on climate change immediately. To be honest with you, this once again is why she's my number one candidate. I understand some people choose Bernie because of Medicare for all specifically. And I understand, because that might be an existential threat to yourself or your family. And God knows, if you can't get healthy, you can't do quite anything else. You don't really have liberty without health. Get it? I understand. Some people choose Yang for UBI. Completely understand. That $1,000 in their pockets is a big deal. As a person who was lucky enough to retire from the military at 23 years old, I understand how much that extra cash can do for you. But a hospital can't stop a nuclear holocaust, right? At the end of the day, we get bogged down sometimes by instant gratification. By the way, this is a person who has gone homeless for the movement, right? I lived in my car for 6 or 7 months while still doing my radio show every Friday. You can see my luggage in my backyard. So when I'm talking about instant gratification, I know what it means to sacrifice instant gratification to pursue the greater good. I gave up law school to do what I do now, to pursue the DNC fraud lawsuit, etc. So when I say that, don't think don't just take it with a grain of salt. I'm speaking from experience here. We have a tendency to worry about instant gratification and ignoring the greater good. Kind of like, I wish I could remember the scientist, or excuse me, the psychologist who discusses this, but basically to say babies at 2 years old, or 1 year old, when you put your hand in front of their face, and you go peekaboo, they really think you're not there, right? So it's the same thing with humans. We think that the concept is limited to infants, but it's not. If we don't see what's happening overseas, we pretend like it's not existing. We pretend like it's not important even. The war, the destruction, this beef going on with China and the United States, the beef that's simultaneously happening between Russia and the United States. We just ended a bunch of nuclear peace treaties, and people pretend like that's no big deal as Russia's ramping up weapons and Putin's giving out a damn statement saying, bro, we could stop this right now if Trump would stop being a punk and come to the table. But he's so scared. Oh, he didn't say that, but he is scared because he's worried about how the Democrats would try and attack him for it. And that's the Democrats' fault too. Right? Now we have farmers. China hasn't bought soybeans in forever because of the tariffs. We're losing, we're like kind of in an unspoken energy war with China right now over lithium, which nobody's talking about, but that's what Bolivia is about. And as we begin to inch towards, 100% electric vehicles, battery-powered electric vehicles, lithium is going to be a source for war for us in the future. These are all things that need to be considered. Russia just made a rocket. They tested a missile that was 27 times faster than the speed of sound. These things could potentially penetrate the defenses of any of our anti-missile technology. This stuff is real. People are ramping up for something big, and we can't pretend like it's not happening. And that's why, that's why I endorse Tulsi. I don't know how she personally feels about China or their leader. I don't know I have a better idea of how she feels about Russia and their leader. And I know for a fact, none of it is irrelevant. She could like them or hate them. That would not stop her from sitting down with leaders that the country considers adversarial, if it means, sorry, I had a gnat in my face, but if it means that we can pursue peace. Remember, FDR sat down with Stalin, right? And Winston Churchill. Stalin, a quote-unquote self-proclaimed communist who didn't really practice communism, but whatever. But he was a quote-unquote communist, right? Winston Churchill, for those of you who don't know, unadulterated racist. That man he was a racist, he was an imperialist. I'm sure FDR knew that, but those are the elected leaders, we got to deal with what you got to defeat evil. And if FDR's meetings with Stalin were upheld, there is no Cold War, for those of you who don't know. The Yalta Conference was only ripped up, the Yalta Agreement was only ripped up and ignored because Truman was able to take over. And he was lied to. And Winston Churchill didn't correct him. But that meeting, I mean, if FDR would have stayed alive, that meeting would have meant no Cold War potentially. It's so we have to be able to sit down with people we don't necessarily agree with if it means the greater good for the entire world. We can all have our micro problems, right? Here and there. We can all have micro decisions about how to deal with those problems based off the region. But we can't ignore existential threats like we have continued to do for decades now. It's getting to that time. Whether or not you believe climate change is man-made, you don't have to agree it's man-made to look for solutions how to fix it. I've had problems in my apartment before. I didn't cause the problems. Does that mean I don't take responsibility for what's mine? This planet is our home. You might not have caused climate change, or you might not feel you have caused it. Okay, fine. Are you still going to be a victim of it eventually? Absolutely. So why don't we talk about solutions? It's that simple. So thank you for this question. Thank you for Tulsi to bringing up the Doomsday Clock. Like I said, it's very, very important. Also, if you have a Qbounti question that you'd like to ask, and I have to say, people have been asking some damn good Qbounti questions, man. Y'all asking some deep stuff. And I like it because it's out of the realm of, even though this one talked about Tulsi, it was only in reference to the Doomsday Clock, but it was out of the realm of this, or the scope of the election exclusively. A lot of people have been asking some pretty damn good questions. And, I really look forward to seeing the questions that you ask, because there's 2 or 3 questions now that are there that I actually have to go do some research before I can answer. But because I don't know about them, it actually makes me more interested to answer those questions versus other questions that might get asked. So that's why I like the Qbounti questions. I like SuperChats too, but the Qbounti chats gives me a time to actually look at your question without being in the flow of another conversation. Take the time to do the research so I can answer your question, in a way that actually substantively addresses what you're trying to ask. All right. So go to Qbounti.com if you'd like to ask a Qbounti question. All right. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.